The crystalline dome of the Galactic Council's emergency chamber caught the light of 3 setting suns, casting prismatic shadows across the assembled representatives of 50 spacefaring species. Under normal circumstances, the chamber's beauty would have inspired awe. Today, it only highlighted the terror in Ambassador Villith's 4 eyes as the Zephyrian's luminescent scales flickered between shades of distress. The situation has grown beyond our control. Villith's translator hummed, voice modulation betraying panic despite its synthetic nature. Our colony on New Haven is. The ambassador's scales flashed deep purple, a color reserved for mourning. Perhaps it would be better to show you. The holographic display materialized in the chamber center, and a collective gasp rippled through the assembly. The once pristine colony, with its signature floating gardens and crystal spires, now lay half-consumed by a writhing mass of iridescent vegetation. The plant-like organism pulsed with bioluminescent patterns as it devoured everything in its path, from buildings to the native wildlife. 30,000 colonists, Villith continued, trapped in the upper levels of our arcology towers. The organism has demonstrated remarkable learning capabilities. It adapts to every countermeasure within days. Counselor Nexon, a methane-breathing entity from the ice worlds, extruded a sensory appendage in concern. The Preservation Corps' latest attempt failed. Villith's scales rippled with remembered horror. The entire team was lost when the organism developed immunity to their containment fields. It consumed their environmental suits while they were still wearing them. The chamber erupted in overlapping waves of universal translator chatter. The Preservation Corps was the Council's elite xenobiological crisis unit, staffed by the most advanced species in known space. Their failure sent shivers through the assembled representatives. Perhaps a crystalline being chimed, the Mechanoid Collective. Their drones were absorbed and repurposed within hours, Villith interrupted. The organism now uses them as mobile hunting platforms. In the furthest corner of the chamber, Junior Counselor Zind of the Suradian League watched the chaos unfold. Her species, resembling what humans would call space squirrels, was among the newest additions to the Council. As she observed the growing panic, her augmented intelligence implants connected seemingly unrelated data points. What about the humans? Her voice, barely above a whisper, somehow cut through the chamber's chaos. The silence that followed was absolute. The Deathworlders. Counselor Nexon's translator crackled with disbelief. You cannot be serious. But Zind was already accessing the restricted files with her neural link. A holographic overlay appeared beside the colony footage. Earth's environmental data. Their homeworld's biodiversity index is off our charts. They've evolved alongside millions of competing species in environments that would kill most of us instantly. They're savages. Someone protested. Did you not see the report on their Australia continent? Exactly. Zind's whiskers twitched with excitement. They survive daily on a world that makes New Haven's current condition look hospitable. Their planet regularly tries to kill them with everything from microscopic organisms to massive predators, and yet they've thrived. The footage from New Haven showed a pack of hunting tendrils dissolving their way through a reinforced barrier. Beside it, Zind projected footage of humans casually handling creatures that made several council members recoil. The humans have extensive experience with invasive species management, she continued. Their planet's history is full of successful containment and elimination of aggressive organisms that threaten their ecosystems. Ambassador Villith's scales shifted to a color of desperate hope. How do they manage such threats? Sometimes, Zind admitted, with methods we might find disturbing. But they get results. And right now, she gestured to the live feed, where another crystal spire collapsed under the organism's assault. We need results more than we need to feel comfortable. The council chamber fell silent again as the implications sank in. Calling in the Deathworlders was unprecedented. Their methods were crude, their approach to danger nearly incomprehensible to civilized species. But as they watched another wave of hunting tendrils claim a residential sector, the choice became clear. Make the call, Ambassador Villith said quietly. But gods help us all if the humans turn out to be as savage as their world. Zend, accessing Earth's communication protocols, couldn't help but smile. The humans had a saying that seemed appropriate: fight fire with fire. The council was about to learn exactly what that meant. Dr. Amanda Hayes tracked mud across the immaculate floor of the council's diplomatic chamber, each bootprint a small rebellion against the sterile environment. Behind her, 3 council maintenance drones frantically scrubbed at the trail, their cleaning protocols thrown into disarray by actual Earth soil. "So," she said, dropping her field kit onto the hovering presentation platform with a thud that made several delegates flinch, "you've got yourself a kudzu problem from hell." Her grin revealed too many teeth by Galactic Council standards, and at least 2 species activated their anxiety suppression fields. Ambassador Villith's scales flickered between diplomatic lavender and distressed mauve. "Dr. Hayes, we appreciate Earth's quick response, but perhaps we should begin with proper introductions and timeless biology." Hayes interrupted, already pulling up holographic displays from her kit. "Every minute we spend on ceremonial niceties is another minute your colony's getting eaten. Now, these tissue samples you sent, fascinating stuff. Reminds me of when the Venezuelan hyperfungus nearly took out half of South America." A ripple of translator-mediated gasps swept through the chamber. Councillor Nexon's methane-breathing apparatus hitched. "Your planet has survived similar outbreaks." Hayes laughed, the sound making several delegates' environmental suits automatically adjust their harmonic dampeners. "Similar. This is Tuesday where I'm from. Earth's got organizations dedicated to nothing but invasive species management. Half of Australia's history is just us saying 'watch this,' and then learning valuable lessons about ecosystem manipulation." She pulled up an image that made Ambassador Villith's scales go stark white. "Now, based on these growth patterns, we're looking at something with distributed intelligence, probably using a mycelial network for coordination. Classic hive behavior, but with a twist. It's learning from mechanical systems it absorbs. That's new. I like it. You like it." The Suridian junior counselor, Zen's whiskers twitched in confusion. "Professionally speaking," Hayes clarified, though her enthusiasm didn't dim, "it's like kudzu had a baby with a Portuguese man-o'-war and then gave it an advanced degree in mechanical engineering. Beautiful example of adaptive evolution. Terrible for your colony, of course, but scientifically fascinating." She started laying out equipment on the platform, each piece more alarming than the last. A flame projector, sample containers crawling with what looked like metallic insects, a series of vials containing substances that made the chamber's hazard sensors wail until Hayes casually waved them off. "Our initial approach will be threefold," she continued, ignoring the growing horror around her. "First, controlled burns to establish containment zones. Fire's a universal reset button for most biological systems. F-fire." Ambassador Villith swayed slightly. "But fire is forbidden on New Haven. The cultural implications alone." "Second," Hayes pressed on, "we'll introduce engineered counterspecies. I've got some promising candidates based on Australian specialists. Nothing says find a new home like having your neural networks disrupted by specialized predators." The chamber's translator system struggled to keep up with the multiple species attempting to object simultaneously. Hayes raised her voice slightly, not in anger but with the practiced patience of someone used to explaining the unavoidable. "And third, this is where it gets fun. We'll use the organism's own learning ability against it. Feed it specific mechanical systems designed to alter its behavioral patterns. Think of it as ecological programming through controlled exposure." Dr. Hayes, a crystalline being, chimed in desperate diplomacy, "Surely there are less extreme methods." Hayes's expression softened, though her eyes retained their intense focus. "There are always other methods. But you've tried those already. 12 species, 12 failures, and now 30,000 colonists are running out of time and space. You called Earth because we're the specialists in surviving the unsurvivable. This is how we do it." She brought up one final hologram. a simulation of New Haven's colony if the organism continued unchecked. The entire settlement disappeared under a writhing mass of iridescent destruction within days. So, Hayes said, her voice carrying the weight of countless battles against Earth's own evolutionary arms race, we can stand here debating methodology while your colony dies, or you can let me and my team do what we do best. Bring balance back to chaos, one controlled catastrophe at a time. Ambassador Villith looked at the simulation, then at the mud on the floor, real soil from the deadliest known planet in the galaxy, and made a decision that would change galactic society forever. Do it, the ambassador said. Whatever it takes. Hayes' smile returned, brilliant and terrifying. Now that's what I like to hear. Let's go save your world. The human dropship descended through New Haven's acid rain, its hull sizzling with each impact. From the observation bunker 2 kilometers away, Ambassador Villith watched in horror as Dr. Hayes' team prepared for their first ground expedition. They're wearing Class 2 environmental suits, the ambassador's aide whispered in disbelief. Those are rated for light industrial work. Not this. Through the bunker's sensors, they watched Hayes adjust her suit's collar with the casualness of someone preparing for a spring shower. The acid rain had already eaten holes through the landing pad's outer coating. Dr. Hayes, Villith's voice crackled through the comm. Our environmental analysis indicates the atmospheric toxicity has increased by 300% since our last measurement. Your suits are perfect for what we need. Hayes interrupted, checking her handheld scanner. Need to feel the environment to understand it. Besides, these things handled the Amazon's modified fungal blooms last year. Now that was nasty. Her 5-person team spread out around the landing pad, each carrying equipment that looked more suited for gardening than confronting a planetary threat. The closest member, a weathered man Hayes had introduced as, "Just call me Jackson," was actually whistling as he collected samples of the writhing vegetation. "Got something interesting here, Doc," Jackson called out. "This tendril's trying to interface with my sample kit's power source. Cheeky little thing." Hayes jogged over, her boots splashing through puddles of rain that had already begun to dissolve the pad's metal grating. Perfect. That confirms my hypothesis about its technological learning capabilities. Let's see how it handles this. To the horror of the watching aliens, Hayes pulled out a simple metal probe and poked the iridescent mass. The organism immediately coiled around the probe, its surface rippling with patterns of light. "Would you look at that response time?" Hayes' voice carried the excitement of a child discovering a new toy. The way it's attempting to analyze and incorporate unknown elements. "Jackson, are you getting this recorded?" "Getting everything, Doc. Including the fact that it's trying to climb your arm." Indeed, a thin tendril had begun creeping up the probe toward Hayes' suit. Rather than retreat, she pulled out a small device and attached it to the tendril. "Let's see how you handle a little electromagnetic confusion, my friend." The tendril spasmed and withdrew, its bioluminescent patterns turning chaotic before it retreated into the larger mass. Hayes made notes on her pad, seemingly oblivious to the fact that the rain had begun eating through her suit's outer layer. "Fascinating defense mechanism," she muttered. "It's not just learning from technology, it's actively seeking to improve its own neural network. No wonder your conventional containment methods failed." In the bunker, 3 different alien species were requiring medical attention from watching the humans' casual approach to what their civilizations classified as an extinction-level threat. Ambassador Villith could only stare as Hayes' team continued their work, occasionally making jokes about the various ways the environment was trying to kill them. "Movement at 2 o'clock, called out Martins, another team member. "Big mass, coming in fast." The assembled aliens watched in horror as a wave of the organism, larger than any previously recorded, surged toward the human team. Its front edge had incorporated pieces of machinery, creating a horrifying blend of biological and mechanical components. Hayes turned to face it, her expression visible through her faceplate. She was smiling. "Now this is what I call a proper welcome party," she said, pulling what looked like a modified flamethrower from her pack. Jackson, get those sample canisters ready. Martinez, begin sonic pulse sequence. Everyone else, pattern delta. Let's show our new friend why Earth's biology wrote the book on survival. The wave of iridescent horror bore down on them, its mass now incorporating dissolved pieces of the landing pad. In the bunker, Ambassador Villith's scales had gone completely white, the color of absolute terror. But as the ambassador washed, something extraordinary happened. The humans didn't run. Instead, they moved with practiced precision, using their seemingly primitive tools in ways that made the organism recoil. Hayes directed her team like a conductor leading a symphony of controlled chaos, each action precise and purposeful. This, Hayes's voice crackled through the calm, heavy with satisfaction, is going to be one of the most interesting challenges we've had since the Jupiter colony incident. Everyone remember to take detailed notes. The xenobiology papers are going to be amazing. In the bunker, Villith realized with a mixture of horror and hope that the humans weren't just surviving. They were enjoying themselves. Perhaps, the ambassador thought, that was the most terrifying thing of all. You want to do what? Ambassador Villith's scales shifted through so many colors of distress that the translator gave up trying to convey the emotional overtones. Dr. Hayes stood before the Emergency Council's holographic projection, hand-drawn maps spread across her makeshift command center. Behind her, massive flames already lit the horizon in careful patterns, creating a perimeter around the colony's central arcology. It's called a controlled burn, Hayes explained for the third time, her patience wearing thin as another lightning storm approached. We're not just setting random fires. Each burn line is calculated to. A massive thunderclap cut her off as purple-black clouds roiled overhead. The alien observers huddled deeper into their bunker, but Hayes just glanced up with mild interest. Actually, this storm's perfect timing. The electromagnetic interference will disrupt the organism's neural network, making it more susceptible to our containment strategy. She tapped her tablet, bringing up thermal imaging. Jackson, how's that southern firebreak looking? Poetry in motion, Doc. Jackson's voice crackled through the calm, nearly drowned out by the sound of his plasma cutter, creating another controlled burn line. You should see how the bugger retreats from the flames. It's learning to fear fire faster than kudzu learns to climb. The assembled alien dignitaries watched in horror as the humans systematically surrounded sections of the colony with walls of fire. The Zephyrians, whose evolutionary history had never included natural fire, were particularly distressed. But fire is chaos incarnate, one of their scientists protested. You cannot control chaos. Hayes laughed, as she adjusted the flame patterns on her display. Chaos is just physics we haven't measured yet. Besides, she gestured to the storm above, where lightning now painted the clouds in spectacular arrays of color. Your whole planet is trying to kill us right now. Fire's just our way of voting on the matter. A massive bolt of lightning struck nearby, causing the bunker's shields to flare. The aliens cowered, but Hayes's team barely seemed to notice. Martinez was actually setting up what looked like a primitive cooking station near one of the fire breaks. Are they preparing food? Ambassador Villith asked in disbelief. Can't fight biological horror on an empty stomach, Hayes replied, checking a readings display. Plus, Martinez makes the best storm-grilled sandwiches this side of the galaxy. Anyone want one? No. Your loss. The organism, as if sensing its territory being challenged, launched a massive tendril attack against the northern firebreak. The aliens watched in terror as it absorbed and repurposed pieces of their advanced technology, creating hybrid monstrosities that slithered toward the human lines. Hayes's response was immediate, but hardly what anyone expected. Perfect. It's following the exact pattern we predicted. Jackson, Martinez, Convergence Protocol 3. Her team moved with practiced efficiency, using the fire lines to herd the organism's tendrils exactly where they wanted them. The humans had turned the inferno into a precision tool, wielding chaos with surgical accuracy. You're trapping it, The Zephyrian scientist realized, multiple eyes widening in comprehension. Better. Hayes's grin was visible even through her faceplate's growing acid rain damage. We're teaching it. Every time it advances, it loses mass to our controlled burns. Every retreat is reinforced by success. Basic conditioning, just on a slightly larger scale than usual. A particularly violent tendril burst through one of the fire lines, its surface gleaming with incorporated technology. Before anyone could react, Hayes calmly stepped forward and triggered a device that sent the creature recoiling in electromagnetic agony. See, it's learning. She made a note on her tablet as Martinez called out that the sandwiches were ready. Though I have to admit, this is one of the faster learning curves I've seen. Most invasive species take at least a week to show this level of adaptation. The storm reached its peak, turning the sky into a cathedral of lightning. The humans gathered around Martinez's cooking station, casually eating and discussing strategy while purple-white bolts crashed around them. In the bunker, the aliens watched in stunned silence as their saviors treated an apocalyptic hellscape like a slightly unusual picnic spot. Dr. Hayes, Ambassador Villith managed finally, your species' approach to crisis is effective, Hayes suggested, taking a bite of her sandwich. Terrifying, the ambassador corrected. Hayes shrugged, her attention already back on the thermal displays. On Earth, those often mean the same thing. Now, who wants to help me calculate the next set of burn patterns? The organism's learning fast, so we'll need to get creative with our next lesson plan. Dr. Hayes stood before the Emergency Council's holographic projection, her acid-scared environmental suit now decorated with an impressive collection of burn marks. Behind her, rows of containment pods hummed ominously, each housing something that made the alien observers' threat detection systems scream in alarm. The fire containment strategy has successfully restricted the organism's spread, Hayes reported, pulling up a three-dimensional map of the affected zones. But it's adapting faster than predicted. Time to move to Phase 2. Which is? Ambassador Villith asked, all four eyes fixed nervously on the containment pods. Hayes's grin should have been classified as a biological weapon. We fight evolution with evolution. Earth's been running the galaxy's longest arms race, and we're about to introduce some of our championship contenders. She walked to the nearest pod and placed her hand on its scanning panel. The cover retracted, revealing something that made several council members activate their emergency translocation beacons. This lovely lady is derived from the Australian box jellyfish, Hayes explained, as if she weren't standing next to something whose very existence violated several galactic safety protocols. We've modified her to survive on land, using the same principles the invasive organism employed. But unlike our iridescent friend out there, she comes from a world where everything evolved to be deadlier than its neighbors. You want to release more deadly organisms. The Zephyrian scientist's scales had gone beyond white into ultraviolet. How does adding more invasive species solve our problem? Because these aren't invasive. They're targeted. Hayes moved to the next pod. This one's based on the immortal jellyfish, with a dash of platypus venom, and some programming traits from the cordyceps fungus. It's designed specifically to disrupt the neural networks our luminous friend uses to coordinate its actions. Jackson, monitoring the pod's environmental controls, chimed in. Think of it as introducing specialized predators. Earth's been doing this for centuries. When rabbits overran Australia, we brought in. Perhaps, Ambassador Villith interrupted hastily, we don't need the full Earth historical context. Hayes shrugged and continued her tour. This batch contains modified versions of electric eels, upgraded to handle the electromagnetic storms and target the organism's technology-absorbing capabilities. And these beauties, she patted a pod that actually growled, are inspired by our deep-sea ecosystem. The organism likes to absorb and repurpose technology. Wait until it meets something that evolved to hunt in absolute darkness, using electrical fields and pressure sensing. The council chamber erupted in overlapping waves of protest, but Hayes spoke over them with the confidence of someone who knew she'd already won the argument. Your colony has less than 48 hours before the organism breaches the final defensive lines, she stated flatly. The fire containment bought us time, but it's learning to route around the burn zones. We either deploy our countermeasures now, or we evacuate and write off this planet as lost. A deep silence fell over the chamber. From the external monitors, they could see the organism's latest attack wave, its tendrils now incorporating pieces of their most advanced defense systems. How? Ambassador Villith's voice wavered. How can you be certain your creatures won't make the situation worse? Hayes' expression softened slightly. Because we've done our homework. Each organism is genetically limited. They can't reproduce without specific laboratory conditions. They're programmed to target only the invasive species' unique biological and technological signatures. And most importantly, she gestured to her team's monitoring equipment. We understand predator-prey relationships better than any species in the galaxy because we evolved on a world that never stopped trying to kill us. As if to emphasize her point, a massive section of the colony's outer wall collapsed under the organism's assault. The sound echoed through the chamber like a death knell. Time's up, Hayes announced, already entering release codes into the pod control system. We can either stand here debating, or we can show this overachieving kudzu why Earth's ecosystem is considered the galaxy's greatest survival training ground. Ambassador Villith looked at the fallen wall, then at the waiting pods, and made another universe-altering decision. Release them. Hayes nodded to her team, and pod after pod hissed open. The aliens watched in horrified fascination as Earth's modified hunters slithered, crawled, and floated into the battlefield, their forms a testament to billions of years of evolutionary warfare. Welcome to Earth-style pest control, Hayes murmured, watching her creations disappear into the chaos. When in doubt, fight monster with monster. Lies. That, are they having a barbecue? The Galactic Council's chief observer twisted all three eye stalks in disbelief, watching the live feed from New Haven's Ground Zero. In the middle of what had been designated the dead zone, Dr. Hayes and her team had indeed set up a cooking station. Behind them, the modified Earth organisms engaged in spectacular combat with the invasive species, creating light shows that put the planet's electrical storms to shame. Jackson makes a mean grilled kebab. Hayes' voice came through the feed, casual as ever. Plus, it's the perfect spot to observe the ecosystem integration. Look there. She pointed with her fork at a particularly violent clash between a modified jellyfish swarm and a mass of iridescent tendrils. The neural disruption is working exactly as planned. The footage, being broadcast across emergency channels to multiple crisis response teams, showed the human-engineered predators systematically dismantling the invasive organism's network. Where the creature had once moved with unified purpose, it now retreated in fragmented chaos. The biological algorithms are exceeding expectations, Martinez added, flipping what looked like synthetic meat on the portable grill. The deep-sea hunters have already mapped the organism's technological weak points. They're targeting its command and control nodes with remarkable precision. Ambassador Villith, watching from the safety of the orbital station, couldn't decide which was more terrifying: the battle raging across the colony's ruins, or the humans' complete nonchalance about it. Your modified organisms, the ambassador began carefully. They're actually hurting the invasive species. Better. Hayes grinned, accepting a plate from Martinez. They're restructuring its behavioral patterns through targeted predation. Each engagement teaches it that certain behaviors lead to painful consequences. It's like training a particularly stubborn pet, just with more bioluminescent explosions. The footage spread rapidly across galactic networks, causing widespread panic among more sensitive species. The sight of humans casually dining in the midst of what most civilizations would consider an apocalyptic nightmare sparked multiple diplomatic incidents. Dr. Hayes, a council member's hologram flickered urgently. We're receiving formal protests from 17 member species. They're demanding we cease the deployment of Earth organisms immediately. Hayes took another bite of her kebab, checking readings on her tablet. Interesting timing. Considering the invasion's containment rate just hit 80%. Jackson, how's the northern quadrant looking? Beautiful talk. Jackson called back, his voice barely audible over the sound of electromagnetic discharge, as another swarm of modified predators cornered a cluster of the invasive organism. The eels are doing amazing work. Haven't seen such efficient neural disruption since that incident with the Brazilian power grid. The protests increased as more footage leaked. Humans handling creatures that could kill most sentient species with a touch. Hayes collecting samples from still writhing portions of the invasive organism. The team using modified Earth predators like guided missiles against specific targets. This is barbaric. One council member declared, using biological weapons. Ecological engineering, Hayes corrected, not looking up from her tablet. And it's working. The organism's learning curve has completely reversed. Instead of adapting to consume our technology, it's learning to avoid anything that resembles Earth-based patterns. Give it another 24 hours, and a massive explosion of bioluminescence lit up the horizon, followed by a wave of retreat signals from the invasive species' largest remaining cluster. Hayes's modified hunters pursued with ruthless efficiency, their movements choreographed like a deadly ballet. Right on schedule, Hayes noted, making another entry in her log. The organism's collective intelligence has reached the critical threshold. It's not just learning to fear our predators, it's learning to fear any new technological or biological integration. Basic survival instinct is overriding its expansion programming. The council feeds exploded with more protests, but they were interrupted by an urgent message from the Zephyrian colony's governing council. 3 more worlds had reported similar invasive outbreaks, and despite the diplomatic uproar, each message contained the same desperate request. Send the humans. Hayes looked at the incoming reports, then at her team's successful containment zone, and smiled. Well, she said, raising her drink in a toast as another bioluminescent explosion painted the sky. Looks like business is booming. Martinez, better fire up the grill again. We're going to need the energy for our next deployment. The Galactic Council's emergency chamber had become a study in controlled chaos. On one wall, displays showed 3 new outbreak zones where the same invasive organism had appeared. On another, a growing list of formal diplomatic protests scrolled endlessly, and in the center, Dr. Hayes stood surrounded by holograms of desperate planetary governors, all trying to speak at once. Gentle beings, Hayes raised her voice slightly, silencing the chamber. Let's handle this efficiently. Yes, my team can deploy to all 3 locations. No, we won't change our methods. Yes, they're horrifying by your standards. And no, you don't have any better options. The governor of Lumini Prime, a gas giant's floating city-state, rippled their luminescent membranes in distress. But the footage from New Haven shows a successful containment operation, Hayes interrupted, pulling up data streams from her completed mission. The colony is secure, the organism is controlled, and our modified ecosystem is performing exactly as designed. Speaking of which, she checked her tablet. Ambassador Villith, your colony's new defensive barrier is evolving ahead of schedule. The Zephyrian ambassador's scales shifted to a color of cautious optimism. The Earth organisms are breeding. Within carefully controlled parameters, Hayes assured them, bringing up complex genetic charts. Each generation is more specialized for your environment, while maintaining their core programming. Protect the colony's boundaries from similar invasive threats. Think of it as a living immune system for your world. The chamber erupted in new protests, but they were drowned out by urgent messages from the infected worlds. The organism had already overwhelmed standard containment protocols on all 3 planets. Worse, it seemed to be learning from each failed attempt to stop it. Fascinating adaptation rate, Hayes muttered, studying the incoming data. It's using different strategies on each world based on available technology, almost like it's experimenting. A new hologram appeared. The Crystalline Consortium's High Facet, their most senior representative. Dr. Hayes, the consortium formally protests the use of Earth-based organisms as weapons of war. Hayes raised an eyebrow. This isn't war, High Facet. This is gardening. Aggressive gardening, sure, but Earth wrote the book on handling invasive species. Speaking of which, she turned to her team, who were already prepping their equipment. Jackson, how's our modified box jellyfish population looking? Ready for round 2, Doc, Jackson called back, checking containment pod readings. The new batch is showing even better adaptation to electromagnetic fields. They're practically dancing in the test chamber. The High Facet's crystalline form vibrated in horror. You're creating more of these monstrosities. We prefer ecological specialists, Hayes corrected, approving deployment orders on her tablet. And yes, we're scaling up production. The organism's showing coordinated behavior across all 3 outbreak zones. That suggests either a shared intelligence or... Her eyes lit up with scientific curiosity. Or it's actually a single entity operating across multiple light years. Martinez, add quantum entanglement sensors to our next batch of deep-sea hunters. The council chamber descended into chaos as more footage leaked. Hayes' team releasing swarms of modified predators on Lumini Prime. Earth organisms adapting in real time to new environments. Humans treating galaxy-class threats like particularly interesting research projects. But with each passing hour, the results became impossible to ignore. The organism retreated on all fronts, its rapid evolution no match for creatures forged in Earth's evolutionary crucible. World after world quietly submitted requests for human assistance, each marked urgent confidential, in a futile attempt to save face. Dr. Hayes, Ambassador Villith spoke during a rare quiet moment. My science council has reviewed your methods. They're calling them controlled extinction events. Hayes looked up from her deployment plans, genuine amusement in her eyes. Extinction? Hardly. We're teaching the organism a fundamental truth about the galaxy. There's always a bigger fish, or in this case, she gestured to a feed showing her modified jellyfish, dismantling a technological node with surgical precision. There's always something that evolved in deeper, darker waters. The ambassador's scales shifted to a new color, one the translator took several seconds to interpret. Reluctant admiration mixed with existential dread. Besides, Hayes added, already turning to the next crisis world's data, this is just the beginning. Once we understand how this organism coordinates across light years, we'll have a whole new set of questions to answer. Jackson, pack the quantum sensors and call the transport. We've got science to do. Welcome to Earth's Interstellar Crisis Response Academy, Dr. Hayes announced to the assembled alien delegates, her grin wider than ever, or as we like to call it, Survival 101 for a very unfriendly universe. The facility, built into the side of an active volcano in Hawaii, exemplified everything that made Earth species unique in the galaxy. Training zones recreated the deadliest environments from across known space, each monitored by teams of human scientists who looked far too excited about their work. Today marks a new chapter in galactic history, Hayes continued, leading the tour past a containment chamber where modified box jellyfish performed complex problem-solving exercises. The Council's recognition of humans as crisis response specialists means we can finally stop pretending we're going to do things the conventional way. Ambassador Villith, now serving as the primary liaison between Earth and the Council, watched a group of alien trainees attempting to handle what Hayes called a starter challenge, dealing with ordinary Earth fire ants. The screaming usually stops after the first week, Hayes commented casually. Well, mostly stops. The important thing is they're learning. The ambassador's scales shifted through a complex pattern of colors. When we first contacted Earth, we thought we were reaching out to savages. Now you know better, Hayes suggested, pausing to check readings on a chamber containing what appeared to be a miniature ecosystem war. We're still savages. We're just savages who turned survival into a science. Through the facility's windows, they could see the volcano's active caldera, where several human instructors were teaching heat resistance techniques. A delegation of methane-breathing species watched in horror as their human guide casually toasted marshmallows over a lava flow. After the success of the New Haven operation, Hayes explained, leading them to the main research center, "We've refined our approach. Each trainee learns not just crisis response, but how to think like a Deathworlder. It's not about being the strongest or the most advanced. It's about being the most adaptable." The central display showed footage from recent operations, human teams deploying across the galaxy, teaching other species how to handle everything from invasive organisms to natural disasters. Each video demonstrated methods that would have been considered insane just months ago. "Your modified organisms," a crystalline consortium observer chimed. "They're being used on 17 worlds now. 23 as of this morning," Hayes corrected, bringing up a galactic map dotted with human intervention zones, each adapted specifically for its environment, each programmed to protect rather than dominate. "We're not just solving crises anymore. We're teaching worlds how to defend themselves." A junior council member raised several appendages. "But the risks are calculated," Hayes interrupted, her expression turning serious. "Everything we do here is based on millions of years of evolutionary trial and error. Earth tried every possible way to kill us, and we learned from each attempt. Now we're teaching those lessons to the galaxy." They passed a training room where alien students practiced handling various Earth creatures, their environmental suits discarded in favor of simple protective gear. One particularly brave Zephyrian was carefully holding a non-venomous snake, their scales shifting between terror and fascination. "Most importantly," Hayes continued, "we're teaching perspective." That trainee, she nodded toward the Zephyrian. 2 months ago, they couldn't even look at Earth organisms without fainting. Now they're learning that fear can be controlled, understood, and used. Ambassador Villith watched as a group of graduates demonstrated their new skills, handling situations that would have been considered unsurvivable by Council standards. "You're changing the galaxy's definition of possible. We're just sharing what Earth taught us," Hayes replied, checking her tablet as new crisis alerts appeared. "Speaking of which," she turned to address the whole group. "Who wants to see how we handle volcanic eruptions? I've got a lovely little extinction-level event brewing on Delta Proxima that'll make a perfect field exercise." To everyone's surprise, including perhaps their own, several delegates raised their appendages. Hayes's grin returned full force. "Welcome to the new age of galactic crisis response," she announced, already heading toward the deployment bay. Lesson 1. Sometimes the best way to handle chaos is to make friends with it. Now, who remembers their training about thermal suits and lava surfing? As nervous laughter mixed with genuine enthusiasm, Ambassador Villith realized that the galaxy hadn't just gained emergency responders. They'd gained a whole new way of facing their fears. Perhaps, the ambassador thought, watching Hayes brief her mixed human-alien team, that was the greatest lesson Earth had to teach. Survival wasn't just about strength or technology, but about facing the impossible with a smile and a carefully calculated plan. Even if that plan sometimes involved riding modified jellyfish through electromagnetic storms.